It's a new year and a new semester, and what better way to get started than talk about Indiana University basketball. I'm Jack Everett, delighted to be back in the studios of the IU Media School alongside Audrey Hausberger. Audrey, how are you doing today?
I'm great. It's the first sportscast of the semester. It feels good to be back.
It feels great to be back. On deck today, we'll talk about where we are so far this season on both the men's and women's side, with Abby Haymond, Talia Goodman, Zion Brown, and Griffin Epstein all to join us in a moment. And we got it started. What a game it was last night. Top 10 win for the women's side of things.
Oh my gosh, it was so awesome to be there listening to how loud Hoosier Nation was to come back and support the women's team in a top 10 matchup, and they pulled it off.
It's been incredible seeing the support, the fan base kind of growing as this team is just, the one setback against Michigan State, but to this point, it's been a great year so far, Audrey.
Right, and even Mackenzie said that a Terrapin told her, Hoosier Nation's legit, and she was like, yeah, I know. So they really showed out last night. Plenty of members of Hoosier Nation watched the top 10 showdown between number 6 Indiana women's basketball and number 9 Maryland last night. Abby Haymond has the recap from Assembly Hall.
Thanks, Audrey. A number 6 Indiana defeated number 9 Maryland last night here at Assembly Hall 68-61. It was a very physical matchup. Sydney Parrish led Indiana with 18 points. However, every teammate remains a major contributor to this team's success. They always give 110% on both sides of the court, and as we get further into the season, it becomes more and more evident that this Indiana team is going to be a tough one to beat. Here's what Terry Morin had to say about her team last night after the game.
They're all important, every one of those kids on that bench, whether they play 3 minutes, whether they play 30 minutes. And, I just think it says, it speaks to their character, how they were raised, the kind of people they are, the kind of teammates they are, and how much, I think this group really enjoys not just being together, but competing together.
This is a team that will stop at nothing. They play to the end and never give up. We will see how that contributes to the end of their season. Back to you guys.
It was a big top 10 win for Indiana last night. I'm here now with Talia Goodman to talk a little more Hoosier women basketball. Talia, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. It's the first newscast of the 2023 season, and what better way to start it off with some basketball. But the Hoosiers locked down their first top 10 win of the 2023 season against Maryland in what I thought was a game that showed real grit and work ethic and confidence with them as a whole and as individuals. What did you see from their game last night that impressed you the most?
I think it was, like you said, that grit, their willingness to fight through the tough parts of the game. Maryland is a tough team. They fought their way back and even tied it up at 50-50 late. So it was impressive that Indiana was able to, take all the things that maybe weren't going so well, the turnovers, maybe some things defensively. Definitely the free throw shooting wasn't going so well, but despite that, they were able to take what they are good at and kind of capitalize and get that win.
Right, and even with those turnovers and their kind of lack of free throw shooting, Terry Morin called it pretty basketball because she said, if you're still able to have that many turnovers and miss that many free throws and still come out with a win against a team like Maryland, she was like, that's pretty basketball. And probably the player that was playing the prettiest basketball was Sydney Parrish with 18 points. Terry said she's really finding her voice. What did you see from her that really made you say wow about her?
See, first of all, I don't know if I'd call it necessarily pretty basketball. I'd say it was great basketball, phenomenal basketball maybe even, but pretty is not the word I would use. Like you said earlier, it was gritty, it was rough, they were really getting in it, but it didn't come easy for them, and so that's why I wouldn't necessarily call it pretty basketball. And I think Sydney Parrish is kind of a perfect example of that, actually. She puts her body on the line every game. You see her falling down, getting those injuries. She was upset after the game for getting a turnover, so she went to the bench, but she is one of those players that gets it done no matter what. She can shoot the ball. She plays phenomenal defense. She's always there when you need to make a play in those big moments.
Right, and she said, I do not like to lose, and that's why I play the way that I play. And they're going to want to keep this win streak going. Looking forward, on Sunday, they play Wisconsin. And Wisconsin's coming off a 2-game win streak against Minnesota and Michigan State, who beat Indiana back in December. What are the Hoosiers going to have to do to keep this win streak going for themselves?
I mean, the Big Ten is tough. We know that. But they have managed to beat some really impressive teams, namely Illinois and Maryland last night was really impressive, and they were able to do that because they play together as a team. So that's what they have to keep doing. Grace is back, and that's good in some ways, but she's also still getting her footing here with the chemistry, and so I think chemistry is going to be the most important factor for them winning these games down the stretch.
I think she provides immense comfort for her teammates on all ends of the court and in all positions. So I think they kind of when Grace went away, it was a little more stress on them, and now that she's back, they have kind of a sigh of relief. And I actually talked to her and her dad a few months ago about how Grace got her start when she was young and what kind of role her dad played in creating the basketball player that she is, and that was really cool to see. Thank you, Talia, for talking to me a little bit more about women's basketball. And with Grace coming back, like we just mentioned, things changed a bit for Indiana. Here's Zion Brown with more.
Back at home with the mid-range queen. That was what Mackenzie Holmes tweeted after Indiana's 7-point win over number 9 Maryland on Thursday. IU's leading scorer from the 2021-22 season is back, and she scored in double figures in back-to-back games. Grace Berger's return is exciting, but it also changed the way the Hoosiers play on offense. Last season, 36% of Indiana's shots were from the mid-range, and that was one of the highest marks in the entire country. This year, the Hoosiers' offense has operated in the two most efficient parts of the floor, the rim and the three-point line. In Berger's 8-game absence, only 19.5% of IU's shots came from the middle area as the team really emphasized getting inside or shooting from beyond the arc. But her presence is already being felt as the Hoosiers' mid-range rate rose to 26% in her 2 games back. IU's offense has to find the right balance with Grace Berger back in this lineup. While Berger adds an extra ball handler and playmaker, she definitely alters how the Hoosiers play. I'll continue to watch the team's shot dichotomy as Berger is thrown back into the mix.
Well, great stuff from Talia, Zion, and Audrey as always. Griffin Epstein alongside me here now to talk about the men's side of things. A lot of positivity for the women right now. 6th in the country, probably going to rise after a big win against Maryland. Similar positivity for the men for you, Griffin?
Honestly, I think we should just stay talking about the women's team instead. There's nothing good to talk about on the men's side right now.
We'll bite the bullet and try and detail what's kind of been happening for a team that's kind of had a massive fall from grace. 10-6 now, 1-4 in the Big Ten. To this point this year, season out of 10 for you, what are you rating it?
Well, it's a tale really of a month of November and then disaster ever since then. They were 7-0 in November. It's hard to believe they beat the national champion favorite at the start of the season, North Carolina, on November 30th to go to 7-0. They were top 10 in the country. Ever since the calendar turned to December, it's been nothing but bad things. They've beaten just one high major team in Nebraska. They've had a horrible January. And it does start with the injuries, but right now it feels like it's more than injuries for Indiana. And at one time they were Big Ten favorite. It may be a fair question to say if they make the NCAA tournament this season. They
firmly are back on the bubble. Zion Brown, one of the beat reporters, wrote, after that game, most recently, just they are back on the bubble, which is a stunning thing to say after how the high expectations that came into the year. You mentioned the injuries. Let's kind of detail those. The two big ones, obviously, Xavier Johnson, Race Thompson, both out for an indefinite amount of time, as we love the communication there. I guess we'll start just with what we have seen them lose by losing those two starters. What absence in their production has Indiana been suffering from?
IU fans took for granted how much Xavier Johnson brought on the defensive end of the ball. I think his loss, it's kind of like you say, you don't realize how much you lost until they're gone. I think the loss of Xavier Johnson showed he was one of the best perimeter defenders in the Big Ten. This defense has just been completely different ever since he was injured against Kansas. Every single high major game they played since they've lost him, they've given up at least 80 points. But I think the loss of Race Thompson also really hurt them defensively. I know people were frustrated at times offensively with Race, but defensively he was key to providing that two-man, big man post play on the defensive side of the ball with Trace Jackson Davis and Race Thompson. And what at one point this team's identity was defense, they have no identity now.
There was a talk a few weeks ago, Race Thompson, should even be in the starting lineup. He had had a few struggles offensively, maybe saying Jordan Geronimo might try and take his spot. Jordan Geronimo, also massive fall from grace in the past few games. But you also mentioned it earlier that injuries have been a problem, but it's been other things as well. Kind of allude a bit more onto that.
It felt like it started with the injuries, but this team has lost an effort, a level of cohesion, really in the locker room and on the court. And again, it starts on the defensive end. With the Penn State game on Wednesday, you know Penn State is the best three-point shooting team in the Big Ten, one of the best in the country. So you would think, both from a coaching staff and a player's standpoint, you go in knowing you have to take away the three-point shot. Instead, the opposite happens. Penn State makes 18 threes, ties a program record. Indiana's defense just looked like they didn't have any communication. They did not have good effort. You have a lot of guys out there that are just not good on-ball defenders, but it just looked like there was no emphasis and understanding from the Indiana players of either what the game plan was or how to execute it.
I guess then to kind of follow up on that, what fixes can happen there? Because if there was such an obvious strength of Penn State that Indiana couldn't recognize, couldn't defend against, how do things improve? How do they get fixed?
It almost feels like Indiana might have to become a better offensive team, because I'm just not sure with the pieces that Indiana has for now. Now, at some point, I think they'll get Race Thompson back, and for Indiana, hopefully Xavier Johnson before the end of the season. Maybe then this team can get back closer to its defensive identity. But right now, you just have guys that are just bad on-ball defenders in Tamar Bates. Miller Kopp has really struggled. So I think you need both of those guys are good offensively at times. They haven't been in January. I think Indiana has to just try scoring 80-plus points per game, and that's their best chance to win games going forward in the Big Ten, because the pieces they have right now, this is just a bad defensive team.
They scored 83 points against Northwestern. They allowed 84. Lost that one last time they were home against Assembly Hall. Next time out, back at home against Wisconsin. Is it must-win territory for Indiana?
It's never must-win in January, but the atmosphere around IU basketball is always so intense. The fans are so intense, and the fall from grace, you called it, has been even more jaw-dropping this season because they were the Big Ten favorites, because they were number 10 in the country, that there's even that much level of pressure. If the team loses this game, it'd be 4 in a row. They have to go on the road to Illinois in their next game. A 5-game losing streak is really tough to stomach for morale of the team. But you think back to Archie Miller's second season, they also lost 5 games in a row in January, and that team was still 1 game away from making the NCAA tournament. So it's not do or die, but in terms of morale around this program, if the team loses on Saturday, things are going to continue to get much uglier.
Two sides of the basketball coin here in Indiana. Women, a lot of success. The men, not much happening. Griffin, I guess just to wrap it up, what do you expect to see on Saturday? Is there going to be an uptick in performance from Indiana? Do you think it's going to be, well, I guess what do you expect to see against the 18th ranked Badgers?
It's a much better matchup for Indiana than Penn State. Penn State we knew was going to chuck up a lot of threes, which obviously Indiana's struggling on the perimeter right now. Wisconsin, does shoot a fair amount of threes, but overall not a very good offensive team. They're in the bottom of the Big Ten in scoring, so this might be a game where Indiana doesn't have to put up 80 points per game. The other thing to watch right now for Wisconsin, their best post player, Tyler Wall, has been out the last 2 games with an ankle injury. He did not practice yesterday on Thursday, so we're not sure if he's going to go on Saturday. Wisconsin's lost 2 in a row, in part being without Wall. If he doesn't go, I think that gives the Hoosiers a much better chance. Again, playing at home and the first time in front of students in nearly a month.
Yeah, it would be a big improvement for Indiana if they could get something done at Assembly Hall on Saturday. Make sure you follow the Hoosier Network, Griffin, Zion, Talia, Audrey, everybody. I might be forgetting someone. I'm forgetting anybody.
We have so many
There's so many great people here at the IU Media School. For our producer, Emma Watson. This does it for our show here today. We'll catch you next time.